Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be talking about Restoration Shaman. This is going to be a guide video for Mythic Plus content. It's going to be somewhat beginner, but we'll talk about many different things in terms of talents, in terms of healing, in terms of rotation, DPS, stat priority, weak cores, macros, and all of those things. So if you enjoyed this type of content, like and subscribe, and let's go and get started. So why play Restoration Shaman in the War Within? First of all, Resto Shaman is doing quite well. You have a lot of utility that you can provide. In my eyes, Resto Shaman will always be one of the best poke healers out there because you have so much utility. On top of the fact that Blizzard has also added or gave Shamans a raid buff in terms of Sky Fury, it's always a nice bonus. And in terms of hero builds, your hero talents in terms of Totemic and Farseer are extremely well balanced, meaning that you could have multiple different builds, and I think that's only a good thing. So first of all, let's talk about stat priority for Restoration Shaman, and honestly, I think gearing Resto Shaman is relatively simple because this video is mainly focusing on Mythic Plus content, but crit and versatility has been the staple for Resto Shaman for a very long time, regardless of which content you're doing. So whether you're doing Mythic Plus or whether you're doing raiding, crit and verse are always going to be great, which means that if you're going to be crafting, you need to decide on which stats to put. Crit and verse is going to be an easy option for most of the content out there. But remember, this is going to be a video that's looking at Mythic Plus content mainly. So after crit, verse is going to be haste and then mastery. Now mastery is usually the lowest because mastery provides 0 damage. And a lot of times in Mythic Plus you want to min-max your healing and damage, and therefore mastery tends to fall on the wayside. Now in terms of haste, I think haste is very interesting because there are certain builds, specifically Farseer, where I think haste has additional benefit because you have these ancestor windows, and the more spells you squeeze in, the stronger throughput you're going to get. And I think haste is something that is going to be very interesting to experiment. Also keep in mind, once you're going to start doing really high Mythic Plus keys, versatility might climb because you're looking at that damage reduction portion and valuing it more when doing high-end content. But crit versus haste mastery seems to be like a pretty convenient way to go right now. If you want to further drill down into stat priority, I definitely advise you to check out websites like Questionably Epic Live, which is great for healers because it can give you somewhat of the default values to follow in terms of deciding which gear is great. For example, here you can create a character. I have my Resto Shaman here. You can select dungeons, which means that it's going to give me a dungeon specific stat priority. I can right click on my Resto Shaman, and the higher the value, the better the stats. So you can see intellect is king, and you can see crit and verse are pretty great, and haste is also not bad at all. And you can kind of change these values, experiment with this, decide on which items are going to be better. Again, Questionably Epic Live is great, and I advise you to check it out and try to master this site. So before we're going to talk about talents, I want to talk about the difference in terms of Totemic versus Farseer, because at the start of the video I kind of mentioned that the hero builds for Resto Shaman are really well balanced, and my advice is this: try out both builds and see whichever one works for you, because I think the balance is pretty good between them. And once you start to push really high-end Mythic Plus skills, there's most likely going to be a hero build that might have a slight edge, and you can try and practice and master that. But as I mentioned already, I think Totemic, depending on the build, can be a great entry to Resto Shaman, and I still think you can do good numbers. And the fact that you have Surging Totem with Totemic, you don't have to cast Healing Rain every 10 seconds, you can do other things in between. It's very appealing. We'll talk about some of my favorite Totemic builds. I personally, Farseer is probably my favorite build right now because of multiple different reasons. So with Farseer, ancestors are extremely versatile in terms of optimizing your healing, in terms of optimizing your damage. You have good spot healing, and I generally believe you have less mana issues with Farseer rather than Totemic, depending on how you optimize Totemic. So right now, I'm probably playing more Farseer, but I genuinely believe Totemic is also a great option. So let's talk about Totemic and my recommended build, especially for someone who's looking to start off the Resto Shaman journey. So in terms of Totemic, I think it's a fun build that you can try out because you have Surging Totem. It's going to have a 24-second cooldown if you're running something like Totemic Surge, which you will. And again, it's going to place Healing Rain. There was a different version of this in beta where the Healing Rain would jump around and things like that, but Blizzard very quickly changed that. So you have Surging Totem, and more importantly, you also have Lively Totems, which is going to give you a way of outputting chain heals without actually hardcasting them. And that is actually also going to impact the fact that you're not going to be picking Tidebringer, at least for this build right now. And on top of that, the Totemic hero build is actually very flexible. In here I have Pulse Capacitor, but depending on how much value you get from Surging Totem, maybe people are not stacking in it, maybe you're not getting a whole lot out of it, I genuinely believe supportive imbuements is also very viable. I think you can actually mess around with both of them and see which one fits your playstyle or just gives you more value. And I also want to talk about the fact that Totemic Coordination with chain heals from your totems are 25% more effective is also somewhat interchangeable with Earth Surge depending on which playstyle you prefer. Let's talk about some examples. Let's say, for example, you're approaching a Mythic Plus dungeon and there's a huge amount of AoE damage. You're running Healing Stream Totem and you want to catch up, you want to provide a lot of AoE, and you're going to be hitting your, for example, Healing Stream Totem back to back, because remember, with lively totems, it's going to send out, or certain totems are going to send out chain heals, and a lot of the times in Mythic Plus, that's going to come down from your Healing Stream Totem or Cloudburst Totem because you're using them quite often. So a lot of AoE damage is happening, you want to catch up, you're sending back-to-back Healing Stream Totems, it's shooting out chain heals, you feel the power of those chain heals from talents like Totemic Coordination, which can be pretty nice. On the flip side, let's say you're running Earth Surge and then you have to look at the interaction with whirling elements. So when you're placing a Surging Totem, you're going to get these buffs, and the Earth one is specifically interesting because your next chain heal applies Earth Living at 150% effectiveness to all targets hits. So for example, let's say you apply there's a lot of AoE damage happening, you apply your Surging Totem, and then you get these buffs and you want to consume the Earth one, you need to cast Chain Heal, you don't really have to cast it, you can press your Cloudburst in this case, it's going to shoot out Chain Heals and it's going to apply Earth Living. And again, the people who have Earth Living, they have Earth Surge where they're receiving increased healing from you, which then you can build your Cloudburst if you want to, so there's a lot of nice interaction here. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to use this as a recommended build initially, but I definitely advise people to try out different hero builds available out there because I think there's a lot of talents that you can change around and still get good results. One last thing for Totemic hero talents. Reactivity has been booked for a very long time right now, and the healing stream portion in terms of the second target, it's being healed for more than it should be. Once Blizzard, I'm assuming, is going to fix this, keep in mind, Totemic Resto Shaman with Healing Stream Totem will drop a little bit in value. In terms of the spec tree for Resto Shaman, when it comes to Totemic Chain Heal build, you definitely want to pick up the Chain Heal talents, and you can see things like Ancestral Reach, you can see things like High Tide. We did not pick Tidebringer because I talked about this multiple times throughout the video in that Totemic section, because you are running lively totems and a lot of your chain heals are going to be coming from other totems, specifically things like Cloudburst or Healing Stream. They're going to be instant casts. You don't really need the cast time reduction from Tidebringer if you can play around it. So this is why you can actually opt out of Tidebringer and still have good results with Totemic. And we'll talk about Farseer, and again, we'll talk about other builds, but I think this talent build right now is actually pretty safe to play, and it's very simplistic. You're running things like Undulation. You don't really run Unleash Life with Totemic. So you run Undulation. You can run Primordial Wave. I know there's a lot of people who don't like Primordial Wave, but I definitely advise people to get somewhat used to it, because I think in really high keys, making use of your full toolkit as Restoration Shaman is going to be important. But if you really don't like it, you don't have to spec in it. At the end of the day, if you're not doing the highest keys, or if you're just trying to do your weekly keys, any build of Resto Shaman is going to be capable of achieving weekly keys. Believe me, I tried and played a lot of beta, and Shaman is looking to be in a very good position. Let's talk about a little bit about gameplay. So in terms of Totemic Restoration Shaman, you're going to be playing around things like Surging Totem. Surging Totem is going to be 24-second cooldown. It's going to place Healing Rain for 24 seconds. So it's something that you're going to be placing. And again, there's going to be Healing Rain around here. Keep in mind, early in the beta, the Healing Rain used to jump around. Blizzard changed that relatively quickly. And in terms of to move this, when playing Totemic in terms of the class tree, you definitely want to spec into Totemic Projection, because you're able to move Surging Totem in case people move out of it, or in case mobs move out of it. Because you have to kind of change how you feel about Healing Rain. Healing Rain is not only there to heal people or friendly targets, Healing Rain is also there to do damage, because Acid Rain is actually so impactful that you're going to be using Healing Rain on single target situations, even if it is just for damage. And that is just kind of wild. So you have to change your rationale about how you view Healing Rain as a Restoration Shaman, because it's not there just to heal, but it's also an amazing tool to provide damage. Outside of that, as Resto Shaman, and we'll talk about the general gameplay, you have a lot of kind of free time. You're not really running Unleash Life in this build, you're running Undulation. You could be running, again, in my suggestions, I definitely advise people to run Primordial Wave, but you have a lot of free time. You're placing your Surging Totem, you're using your Riptides, you're using your Healing Stream Totem. Again, we're running Healing Stream Totem here. In terms of a lot of your chain heals coming from lively totems, if you have your High Tide buff, so every 1 million mana you spend brings a High Tide, making your next 2 chain heals heal for an additional 10% and not reduced with each jump. So every time you spend a lot of mana, and I'm just gonna try and use up as much mana as possible right here. So my high tide is gonna show from my weak auras. So let's say I'm gonna use my surging totem here, and you can see my high tide is here. I have 2 stacks of it. I don't have to hardcast Chain Heal. I can just press my Healing Stream Totem or Cloudburst, depending on which one you're running. It's going to shoot out Chain Heals and it's going to consume the high tide. This is what I mean by the fact that a lot of people are not running with Tidebringer right now, because a lot of your Chain Heals are coming from Lively Totems, which are instant cast. So this is why I say Totemic might be a bit less daunting for new players coming in, because you don't have to cast Healing Rain every 10 seconds or manage Healing Rain every 10 seconds like you do with Farseer, because with Totemic you have Surging Totem, that's going to handle your Healing Rain. If you have to move this, you can use Totemic Projection. You can consume these buffs as well relatively easily. If, again, you're going to manage your Healing Stream Totem or Cloudburst Totem, is going to shoot out Chain Heals for you, and that leaves you with a lot of free time. You're going to be using Riptides, and you can do a lot of different things in between. Do you need to provide single target healing? Do you need to provide single target damage, AoE damage? So I think with Totemic you can have a lot of leeway in terms of how you want to play around this, in terms of the buttons that you have to manage compared to Farseer, which I think has these windows that you really want to optimize and can be difficult to play if you really want to min-max. But let's go and look at Farseer and see if it's for you. So now let's talk about Farseer Chain Heal build, and this build is going to make use of High Tide and Chain Heal, and it's also going to make use of the spot healing that Farseer can provide, and it's going to try to optimize damage and healing. And depending on which build you're running, it can be somewhat daunting with the amount of abilities that you can have, because specifically in here you're going to have Unleash Life, you're going to have Primordial Wave, you're using Healing Rain every 10 seconds. There's going to be a lot of buttons that you want to squeeze in, and you're going to have these windows. You're going to have Call of the Ancestors, and this is nothing new. It's very similar to something like Holy Priest Divine Image, and you're going to have windows where whenever you cast a healing or damaging spell, an ancestor will cast a similar spell, and it's very confusing when I showcase this in game right now. But I'm running with things like Heed My Call, where ancestors last an additional 4 seconds, and I'm running with Unleash Life, which means that when I press Unleash Life, an ancestor is called to your side for 16 seconds. Another thing that's very important to note here, you have Ancestral Swiftness, which is another way to proc your ancestor, but it's only going to last for 10 seconds. So there are going to be multiple different windows that we're going to talk about right now. So what the hell do the Call of the Ancestors do in terms of casting a similar spell to yours? We're going to talk about the fact that you can proc your ancestors in multiple different ways. We talked about the fact that Unleash Life can do it. Undulation can also do that, and I think you can run Undulation if you really want to. So I'm running Unleash Life right now, and Unleash Life is going to proc an ancestor for 16 seconds. You can see the bar here right now, and it's showing that I have an ancestor here. And if I cast a single target heal ability like Riptide, it's going to cast a Healing Surge. If I cast Healing Wave, it's going to cast a Healing Surge. A single target healing ability, any single target healing ability that I cast, my ancestor is going to cast Healing Surge instead. I'm going to take off Earth Living so you can see it a little bit easier, but if you cast any AoE healing ability while your ancestors are active, your ancestor is going to cast Chain Heal. So I'm going to proc Ancestor for 16 seconds because I use Unleash Life. I'm going to cast Chain Heal. My ancestor is also going to cast Chain Heal. If I use, again, in this scenario, Healing Stream Totem and Cloudburst Totem I viewed as AoE. So if I press my Healing Stream Totem, my ancestor is also going to cast Chain Heal. If I cast, again, I have to proc my ancestor again. I'm proccing it. If I cast my Healing Rain, my ancestor is going to cast Chain Heal. If I cast Downpour, my ancestor is going to cast Chain Heal. So this is what I mean in terms of simplification, in terms of what ancestors do. Any single target healing ability you cast, your ancestor is going to cast Healing Surge. Any healing or AoE healing ability you're going to cast, your ancestor is going to cast Chain Heal. This is also true for things like Cloudburst Totem and Healing Stream Totem. Any DPS or single target DPS ability that you cast when your ancestor is active, for example, something like Flame Shock, your ancestor is going to cast Lava Burst, and that is always going to crit. If I have my ancestor available as well, I'm going to cast my Unleash Life here. If I cast an AoE healing, AoE damaging ability in terms of Chain Lightning, it's also going to cast Chain Lightning. So this is how ancestors work. They're not the most, they don't really replicate your spells match to match. They actually just have a very generic parameters in terms of what spells they cast. So in terms of the rest of your Farseer Chain Heal build, again, you can run Cloudburst Totem or Healing Stream Totem. I'm going to have a separate section for that if you really want to see it. I think they're both interchangeable when it comes to Mythic Plus content, depending on which playstyle you prefer. A lot of the build here, we have a lot of the Chain Heal talents because we want to, how do I say, the Farseer Chain Heal build is going to make use of the best of both worlds in terms of single target healing, in terms of AoE healing, and I think that's actually great. You don't necessarily have to pick things like Earth Living Weapon. You can actually go down this route as well, but I feel like Earth Living is just something more passive, and a lot of people sometimes just get overwhelmed with the amount of buttons that you can have. Because this build specifically, if you're using Unleash Life, you can use Undulation if you want. I think both of them are competitive, but with Unleash Life, you can have a controlled way of getting Ancestors. And you also can have a controlled way of getting Ancestors through Ancestral Swiftness. And this creates a very interesting windows that you can do with Farseer, specifically with this build, specifically with Unleash Life, where you can really min-max the heck out of this. What you'll notice from this talent build is that you don't have Earth and Harmony, and that honestly sucks. It sucks a lot because I really like Earth and Harmony. I like the DO that it provides in terms of Earth Shield. And if you want another version of the Farseer Chain Heal build that might use less buttons, or you might have less buttons to track, you can absolutely take a point away from Unleash Life, swap to Undulation, and again, you won't have Unleash Life and on-demand Ancestors, but that is not the end of the world. And with Undulation, once you start doing Mythic Plus dungeons, you'll notice how much of your total healing as Resto Shaman is coming from abilities like Healing Surge. So Undulation, I think it's perfectly valid. You won't have Unleash Life, you don't have to track it, or again, you can track Undulation and you can absolutely optimize it with a bunch of other abilities, and we'll talk about it, but at the end of the day, it might not be as intensive as something like Unleash Life. And then, this is almost like a disclaimer for a lot of Resto Shamans out there who are going to be copying these best builds out there, and most of the best builds are probably going to be including Primordial Wave. But there is so many Resto Shamans out there that might spec into Primordial Wave, they'll never use it or they'll never optimize it, they absolutely hate this ability. It's very it divided the community. There's a lot of Resto Shamans who enjoy Primordial Wave and the min-maxing that you can have. For example, Primordial Wave interacts with Undulation, with Unleash Life in a really interesting way, and we'll talk about it later on. And there's going to be a lot of Resto Shamans who just don't use this ability or hate it. If you're one of those Resto Shamans, take the point away, put it into Earth and Harmony right now, and just call it a day. This Shaman build for Farseer Chain Heal build, again, you won't have Unleash Life, you won't have Primordial Wave, it'll simplify or it'll have reduced number of buttons, and it can absolutely work. Again, it really depends on the type of content you're doing. Do you want to push really high keys? Are you just filling up your weekly vault? But my advice, if you're trying to min-max your Shaman to an extreme, you definitely want to have Primordial Wave, you definitely want to get good with it, you definitely want to learn about the interactions with a lot of your other talents. But if you're someone who just hates it, never uses it, don't spec into it. Don't waste a point if you don't optimize the ability. But overall, for that Farseer Chain Heal build, my recommendations, if you really want to min-max your Resto Shaman, running Unleash Life on-demand Ancestors can be really, really nice, especially, again, if you're min-maxing your Resto Shaman to an absolute extreme. Primordial Wave has interaction with a lot of your talents, can be very good if used properly, and if you really want to pick up Earth and Harmony, I think a lot of people are going to make some sacrifices. People are probably going to be looking at dropping Downpour or either Tidebringer in order to get Earth and Harmony. And this is what I hate the most about this build, because if only you had one extra talent point as a Resto Shaman, this would be absolutely perfect. Because if you drop Downpour, Downpour provides a heal, it provides a HP increase. If you use it during Ancestor windows, your Ancestors are going to cast Chain Heal. If you drop Tidebringer, again, Tidebringer for Farseer is a lot different than Totemic, because for Totemic, a lot of your chain heals are going to be instant cast because of lively totems. For Farseer, you're going to be hard casting chain heals, so if you drop Tidebringer, you're definitely gonna feel the loss of that cast time reduction from Tidebringer. So it is a relatively difficult choice, and I'm going to be testing Mythic Plus a little bit more. Can I run Mythic Plus without Earth and Harmony? And if I really can't, I'll provide my feedback in further videos. So let's assume you're playing a similar build to this. You're playing Unleash Life, you're playing Primordial Wave. Of course, you're playing things like Ancestral Swiftness because that's way of proccing your Ancestors. It's very, very important. You have to look at the fact that Unleash Life in terms of proccing your Ancestors is going to be for 16 seconds. In terms of using Ancestral Swiftness, it's going to proc your Ancestors for 10 seconds instead. So you can have these windows where, for example, you use Unleash Life, you use AS or Ancestral Swiftness, and now you have a window where you have two Ancestors. And you really want to min-max the abilities that you're pressing here, whether it's going to be trying to optimize your single target healing, AoE healing, optimize your damage, for example. So this is what I mean in terms of possibly haste climbing value when you're playing Farseer, because the more haste you have, the more abilities you can fit in. And I think I'm going to be experimenting with haste in the future. So this is why I say that Farseer might seem a little bit daunting for new players or someone's coming into Resto Shaman for the first time, because you have these windows, you want to optimize them. And again, we talked about the fact that if you use your Unleash Life, AS, and then you do your combo, whatever it is, whether it's providing AoE, single target healing or whatever, you will have 2 ancestors. You try to optimize that. Your Unleash Life is going to come off cooldown because it's only 15 seconds. You can use your Unleash Life, and then you're going to have a window with 1 ancestor. And then after that window expires, your Ancestral Swiftness is going to come off cooldown with Unleash Life, and then you're going to have another window with 2 ancestors. So you go from 2, 1, 2 type of build or type of ancestor windows that you can do if you use those abilities on cooldown. And I think this is where kind of, you know, min-maxing comes in. Technically speaking, there is going to be a sequence of abilities that you can do during those windows that is going to net you the highest gain depending on situation you're doing, but that might be a little bit convoluted for this video. Let me know if you want to see a more advanced guide in terms of looking at these windows. If there's enough interest, if there's enough people who want this, I might make an advanced Farseer video. A lot of people have talked about this already in terms of using Unleash Live on something like Healing Rain. In terms of the Unleash Life usage, if you use it on Healing Rain, you might be like, hey, what the affects 2 additional targets? It's purely for damage. If you have a big pulse out there, you could use Unleash Life on Healing Rain, which is going to impact more people, and Acid Rain is going to do more damage, and this is great for something like especially easier content where there's a lot of big pulse. A lot of the times Unleash Life might be used. You can use Unleash Life in multiple different situations. You're not really going to use Unleash Life on something like Downpour because it affects 2 additional targets. Downpour is purely for healing. 5-man group is only 5 people. You're not going to use it in Wellsprings because you don't have Wellsprings in Mythic Plus content. But all the other ones, they're kind of depending on situation, and you can use them in multiple different ways. Again, remember, if you use Unleash Life on Riptide, it also impacts the initial heal and the actual hot portion. So let's assume example where you're doing a massive pull, tons of flashbacks, tons of mobs. You can use something like Unleash Life AS into Healing Rain. That's going to have additional 2 enemies. You can use Healing Stream Totem, Downpour, Healing Stream Totem. You have High Tide. You can cast Chain Heals because you have High Tide. There's going to be a lot of free healing that you're getting from this, because when you're casting Chain Heal, your ancestors are going to cast Chain Heal. When you're casting Downpour, your ancestors are going to cast Chain Heal. When you're casting Healing Rain, your ancestors are going to cast Chain Heal. And the fact that you have, or both your Healing Rain with Unleash Life, means you have 2 additional enemies that are getting ticked by Acid Rain. And also your Healing Rain is also dealing more damage and healing because of AS. Keep in mind, Ancestral Swiftness has a bug, an issue right now with the healing or the damaging portion in terms of buffing your Healing Rain does not work. The healing portion works for Healing Rain, but the damage does not. There's also other issues with reactivity. There's quite a few bugs the Resto Shaman still has, but I'm assuming those are going to get fixed. Lastly, I want to talk about Farseer no Chain Heal build, and this is something that I actually used a lot in the War Within beta, and I had a good time with this. So this build out here does not spec into any Chain Heal talents. It does not spec into High Tide. It does not spec into Tidebringer. It does not spec into any of the Ancestral Reach or Flow of the Tides. And because of this, you can pick up talents like Earth and Harmony a lot easier. So overall, I genuinely believe this build might be a little bit scary for a lot of Resto Shamans out there, because a lot of Resto Shamans like to press Chain Heal during these heavy AoE moments, especially if you have High Tide buff available. And this build completely ignores all of this. You have to play around your Primordial Wave. You can spec into Cloudburst if you want to. You can, again, anticipate damage, fill up your Cloudburst, use it, and there's a lot of different ways to min-max this, but if you're someone who likes to press Chain Heal, I would probably ignore this build. Now, based on my experience in beta, in Mythic Plus, running these weekly keys, I played this build quite a lot, and honestly, it was more than enough. I didn't really miss pressing Chain Heal because there was a lot of healing that I was doing with what I already had. So I really like this. I'm not sure how this is going to do in really high keys. I'm going to experiment between Farseer Chain Heal and Farseer no Chain Heal build, because I genuinely believe, especially for these weekly keys, both of these builds can be more than enough, and it really kind of depends on your preference at the end of the day and the keys that you're pushing. Let's talk about Healing Stream Totem versus Cloudburst. Now, this is something that came up throughout the video multiple times, and I said I was going to make a chapter for it because I think this is one of those questions that a lot of people are asking. Now, keep in mind, historically speaking, Healing Stream Totem for Resto Shaman was not really viable for a very long time because you would just get more value out of Cloudburst. And Resto Shaman was a class that basically, if you wanted to min-max it, you would just play Cloudburst all the time and you would just have to try a lot harder. Now, Blizzard has changed that kind of tuning throughout the years, and I think Healing Stream Totem is a lot closer to Cloudburst Totem. And based on my experiences, personally, I feel Healing Stream Totem is my favorite when it comes to Mythic Plus content. So for example, I use Healing Stream Totem as a way to facilitate or allow me to DPS more. I place my Healing Stream Totem and then I go to DPS. And my Healing Stream Totem is healing in the back, and that's all good. Keep in mind, in the War Within, Healing Stream Totem in terms of living stream, it ramps down instead of ramping up, which was evident in Dragonflight. So it's a bit of a different kind of healing pattern that you have with Healing Stream when it comes to the War Within. But overall, I really enjoy Healing Stream Totem because it allows me to do other things. Cloudburst Totem, on the other hand, can be exceptionally good if you feed it properly, right? Cloudburst Totem is useless if you don't do healing because it takes in a portion of your healing and stores it. So you can see what I mean when saying that Cloudburst Totem is only as good as its user. Now, my consensus on Healing Stream Totem versus Cloudburst Totem, I'm personally going to be running Healing Stream Totem up to a certain point until I'm like, hey, I really need to min-max my healing. I'm constantly healing. I need to push my HPS. I need to optimize my Resto Shaman. I'll probably be swapping to Cloudburst Totem at that point, but I'm not sure what the key level is going to be. Maybe it's going to be more dependent on the dungeon in terms of how scripted the damage is. So my kind of suggestion is try out both of these builds, and honestly, your choice might depend on how high you want to push, or maybe your playstyle in general. And again, another thing that you need to remember, if you're playing Farseer, the Farseer or Ancestor healing is not going to go into Cloudburst. That still does not mean you cannot run Cloudburst for Farseer. It's still a very good option, probably more dependent on your gameplay choices. Let's talk a little bit about the class tree, because I didn't want to showcase the class tree too much because there's so many different nodes or different talents that you can pick up based on the different situation. Again, if you're running Totemic, you definitely want to pick up Totemic Projection because that allows you to move Surging Totem. But outside of that, honestly, like, there's going to be situations when you want to pick up Poison Cleansing Totem, situations when you want to pick up Decurse, situations where you might want to pick up Purge. There's going to be situations in certain dungeons where you want to pick up Jet Stream. So I did make a weak order, a very, very simplistic weak order that will tell you if you're missing a Decurse, if you're missing your Poison Cleansing Totem, or maybe you have Poison Cleansing Totem and you don't need it. That weak order is going to be available. It's either going to be in the description or in my Discord, available for anyone who wants this. And hopefully it's going to help out people in terms of which talents you want to pick up. But generally speaking, it's very open to interpretation. Again, I do pick things like Thunderstorm. I do pick things like Thundershock because I want that kind of stop. I want AoE stop in terms of Capacitor Totem. I want to have Nature Swiftness. There's a lot of things that you, again, kind of pick up by default. You could pick up Primordial Bond if you need that extra damage reduction while your Earth Elemental is active. For example, there's going to be situations where you want to pick up Tremor Totem, specifically Mist at Kainer's side. Maybe you don't need Decurse, maybe you don't need Poison Cleansing Totem, you can pick up Windrush Totem. There's going to be times where you want to use Totemic Recall on things like Poison Cleansing Totem because there's so much poison going out. There is quite a few dungeons where there's going to be specific tips and tricks in terms of utilizing your Shaman class tree, but it's honestly going to be dependent on the dungeon you're doing. And let me know how the week hour works out. I'm going to be testing it a little bit more, but it's there available for everyone. So let's talk about Resto Shaman general rotation. And again, there's quite a few maintenance things that you need to do as Resto Shaman. For example, Healing Rain. You definitely want to be casting Healing Rain as often, and don't view Healing Rain as healing ability only, because it provides a lot of damage with Acid Rain. You want to make sure that it's hitting enemies depending on what the current situation is. Oh, and it's definitely worth noting that after using your Healing Rain, or in Totemic case, after using Surging Totem, you can press that button again and you have a short window where you can activate Downpour for additional healing if people are stacked, and it also is going to increase in terms of Downpour. It's going to increase players' HP for a short time, and it works with Ancestral Vigor. So as an example, I'm going to use my Surging Totem here. I have a 12-second window where I can activate my Downpour with Totemic and Surging Totem. With Farseer, I have a 6-second window. So my HP is 4.4 million. I'm activating Downpour, my HP increases. I press Riptide to activate Ancestral Vigor, and my HP increases further. You have Earth Shield. You can have Earth Shield on yourself or the tank or any DPS. Maybe a DPS is taking a lot of single target damage. They have a debuff that you need to heal off. You're able to do this because you're going to be speccing into Elemental Orbit. Riptide is going to be your bread and butter because there's so many talents that interact with Riptide. For example, you have things like Deluge, where Healing Wave, Healing Surge, and Chain Heal heals for an additional 15% of targets affected by your Healing Rain or Riptide. It's going to be easier to get value out of that from Riptide because people might be spread out, they're not stacking any healing rain. You also, very important, the only way to generate tidal waves is through Riptide. So you can see these orbs right here. This is my weak core that's showcasing that I have tidal waves. And tidal waves, the cast time of your healing wave or chain heal is reduced by 20%, or critical effect chance of your next healing surge is increased by 30. Now, your Season 1 tier set is going to interact really nicely with tidal waves. We're not going to cover that too much, but I like Season 1 tier set. I think it's pretty great. It doesn't really alter your gameplay too much, but it just impacts or adds additional value to your tidal waves and spells that interact with tidal waves. So Riptide is important because it interacts with multiple different ways. It generates tidal waves. Again, you don't want to sit on 2 stacks of Healing Stream Totem. If you're running Cloudburst Totem, you can anticipate when to use it, but most of the time you're gonna use Cloudburst Totem on cooldown anyways, unless you really are waiting for certain situations. If you're expecting to Primordial Wave, there's multiple ways of buffing its healing and maximizing its output in terms of cleave and stuff like that, especially if you're running Undulation or Unleash Life, because both of them interact in a really nice way. So for example, let's say you have a lot of Riptides out on a party, you press your Primordial Wave, and then you can see your Primordial Wave, you have this time window where you can use your next healing wave, where you can use Unleash Life in this case. So now you have Unleash Life and you have Primordial Wave and you can cast Healing Wave, and that cleave is going to be buffed. In the exact same way, you can also do that with Undulation. With Undulation, every third healing wave or healing surge heals for an additional 50%. So now, for example, let's say I'm casting my healing surges, and my next healing surge or healing wave is going to be increased, and you can see this tracking right here. I can press Riptides on a lot of targets. Again, I want to spread this. I press my Primordial Wave, and then I can use my Healing Wave, and you can see it's going to buff that cleave as well. And again, optimizing this requires a decent amount of setup, because a lot of people, I know there's a lot of people who don't like Primordial Wave, but if you can actually anticipate it, if you can actually track it, if you have the weak cores, you can optimize that healing. In terms of chain heal usage, again, if you're running that high tide build as Resto Shaman, you want to optimize chain heal. I tend to only cast chain heal or focus on casting chain heal during my high tide windows. So for example, right now I'm going to use up some mana. I'm going to cast some of my abilities. My high tide is going to proc, and you can see it's going to be right here. This is a weak word I'm tracking of 2 charges. So if I have high tide, I'll press chain heal. Again, cherry on the top, I also have Tidebringer right now as well. So again, tracking both of these is relatively important. If you do play Totemic, you might be playing without Tidebringer in general, because a lot of your chain heals are going to be instant cast because you have talents from Totemic like Lively Totems. So it has kind of a little bit of a different gameplay. And now let's talk about Restoration Shaman single target healing, and you'll soon realize how important Healing Surge is going to be. Healing Surge is your bread and butter when it comes to Resto Shaman healing in Mythic Plus content, and there's a couple of things you need to do in order to optimize it. For example, making sure I'm managing tidal waves. If you press Riptide, it's going to generate tidal waves, and if I press Healing Surge right now, my Healing Surge crit chance is going to be increased because tidal waves are active. In this situation right here, I'm using my weak cores to show blue orbs when I have tidal waves. Now, if you're also running Season 1 tier set, there's also a couple of nice interactions, but if you're also running Farseer, in terms of managing your tidal waves, you have this, which means that tidal waves can now stack up to 4 times. You might have Elemental Reverb and might have Echo of Elements, which means that your Riptide has 3 charges. And again, Riptide is going to generate tidal waves, and if I need single target healing, I'm going to be pressing Healing Surge, which is going to be buffed because of tidal waves. And if this wasn't enough, a lot of Resto Shamans in Mythic Plus content are going to be playing around with Master of Elements. So based on your Lava Burst usage, based on how you manage your tidal waves, this is what I mean by saying Healing Surge is going to be your bread and butter when it comes to that Resto Shaman Mythic Plus healing. And lastly, before this video gets way too long, I wanted to talk about Resto Shaman DPS a little bit. And I approached DPS of Resto Shaman in a very different way, because I know there's going to be most optimal rotation for single target, for AoE, for 2+ targets and all those things, but because you have Master of Elements for pretty much every single build when you use, or when you're doing Mythic Plus content, and Master of Elements, they promote Lava Burst usage because it's actually going to enhance your healing. And you can see here, casting Lava Burst increases the healing of your next Healing Surge by 30%, stacking up to 2 times. So if you have 2 stacks, it's going to be 60%. That Healing Surge is going to be absolutely pumping. And on top of that, Healing Surge applies Flame Shock to a nearby enemy when empowered by Master of Elements. Just a quick example of how Master of Elements might interact. In this case, I want to be casting Lava Burst on this target here, but again, you want to cast Lava Burst on targets that already have Flame Shock on them. That way, Lava Burst will always crit. But let's say, for example, you're already casting Lava Burst, or your Flame Shock is on cooldown, but it's going to come off cooldown very, very soon. You can finish casting Lava Burst and then apply Flame Shock right after. Your Lava Burst is going to crit. You're going to get a stack of Master of Elements. Let's say someone is taking damage. I'll press Riptide. I get Tidal Waves. I'm still attacking. I'm going to cast Lava Burst on this target again. Again, my Flame Shock ticks gave me proc of Lava Surge. I have 2 stacks of Master of Elements. Someone's taking huge amount of single target damage. I have Tidal Waves. I'm casting my Healing Surge. You can see I got 2 Flame Shocks that were kind of came out from Master of Elements because I have 2 stacks, and that Healing Surge was 60% stronger because of the 2 stacks of Master of Elements. This is what I mean by weaving in your damaging abilities to enhance your healing, which is honestly a pretty fun way of playing Resto Shaman. But keep in mind, the example that I showcased earlier is just purely to showcase the interaction with Master of Elements. At the end of the day, if you really want to min-max your DPS, Healing Rain with Acid Rain is going to be extremely important. It's so strong that you even use Healing Rain with Acid Rain on single target. But after that, it really depends on the situation. For example, if I'm facing 2+ mobs, I like to weave in Chain Lightning. But at the end of the day, no matter what the trash pack is, there might be some priority targets out there that need to die faster, and I like to apply Flame Shock on those targets. Flame Shock ticks are going to give me a chance of getting Lava Surges. Those Lava Surges means I can cast more Lava Bursts. Lava Bursts are going to give me stacks of Master of Elements. And Master of Elements is going to empower my healing and also spread Flame Shock. And in short summary, no matter what the situation you're facing, whether it's going to be single target or large AoE trash packs, if you're running Acid Rain, you are going to be pressing Healing Rain. Now, after that, it really depends. Maybe you're doing single target. You want to make sure they have Flame Shock. You're pressing Lava Burst. You're pressing Lightning Bolt. Or maybe you're dealing with large AoE trash packs, and then it really kind of depends. Do you have priority targets? Do you want to focus on priority targets? Maybe you want to build up your Master of Elements because right now nothing's really happening, but very, very soon there's going to be a lot of single target healing needed. Or, for example, let's say this trash pack is very close to each other. And in my case, I'm running Farseer, and for example, I might use Unleash Life AS into Healing Rain. That's going to affect 2 additional targets, and then I'm going to be spamming Chain Lightning because this trash pack, all I want to do right now is just add pure damage. Again, we're assuming everyone's stacked up. Just to touch base in terms of some of the Restoration Shaman cooldowns, because you have quite a few cooldowns to keep track of. I think Resto Shaman output is already pretty strong, and when you can combine it with some of these cooldowns, it's actually really, really good. For example, you're looking at things like Spirit Link Totem. You can add value to it by speccing into Spouting Spirits, depending on which build you're running, or depending if you have points available. You also have Healing Tide Totem, which you can also spec into Current Control to make it shorter. You can also, for example, have a 2-minute Ascendance because you're speccing into First Ascendant. I think you can also try out Preeminence depending on which dungeon you're doing, depending on how you want to optimize it. I think there's a lot of, again, your builds as Resto Shaman are quite open, which is honestly really, really, really great. Again, Ascendance being on 2 minutes is quite great because you can also combine it with Ancestral Guidance. You don't have to do it, but you can because it aligns quite well. Again, we talked about Healing Tide Totem. If you're running Cloudburst Totem, a lot of the times, if you're using a cooldown, you also want to make sure Cloudburst Totem is also active. Healing Tide Totem does not work with Cloudburst Totem if you're looking for some crazy interactions. There's a couple of things that Cloudburst Totem works and it doesn't work. Again, you could make a huge list. I might do that in future videos. In terms of defenses for Resto Shaman, you have Astral Shift. And again, a lot of people are going to be speccing into Plains Traveler in terms of reducing the cooldown of Astral Shift by 30 seconds. You also have Earth Elemental if you spec into it, and you have to remember, while this elemental is active, your maximum health is increased by 15%. If you want to add additional power to this, you can spec into Primordial Bond, where while you have elemental active, your damage taken is reduced by 5% also. And on top of that, you also have Stone Bulwark Totem, which is a new addition in the War Within. So you have 3 of these cooldowns or defenses that you can kind of cycle through. And if you really want to min-max, you can also spec into things like Spirit Wolf, where you can actually stay in the Spirit Wolf form and you gain this damage reduction defensive or damage reduction buff, where it stacks up to 4 times, and you can see here damage taken is reduced by 20%. Now, let's say you have an ability that's going to happen in the next couple of seconds, it's going to hit you and you need to survive it and you don't have enough HP or you're going to die, you can go into Ghost Wolf and you can stack this up. Again, it might be difficult to heal others if there's damage happening, but you can min-max this if you know how to do it. You can also talk about Earth Shield as being a defensive, but that is only going to depend if you spec into Earth and Harmony, because it's going to provide 5% DOR, which again is something nice. So there's a lot of things that you can cycle through as Resto Shaman depending on the situation, and you need to be aware of those especially when doing high-end Mythic Plus keys. Thank you guys for checking out my Resto Shaman guide video. Now, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments or in my Discord. At the end of the day, I encourage people to check out as many guides as possible. Check out your class Discords and all those things and see what works for you. And I know this video is mainly focusing on Mythic Plus content because I did get to try out Resto Shaman a lot in Mythic Plus when it comes to beta, but I didn't get to play Resto Shaman in raid as much as I like to, so my raid guide, if people want to see it, is going to come down later on once I get to test out Resto Shaman more specifically in that raid content. So let me know if you like to see more videos like this in the future, and if you like the content, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next guide.